The Galactic Education Center's most prestigious academy buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Students from 17 different species hurried through gleaming corridors, their various appendages clutching data tablets and neural interfaces. The smell of processed nutrients mixed with the artificial atmosphere, creating that distinctive scent of institutional learning that seemed universal across civilized space. Zara Martinez walked through the crowd with her usual unhurried pace, drawing the expected stares. At barely 5 feet tall with dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail, she looked unremarkable by most standards. That was exactly how she preferred it. 3 months into her exchange program, she had learned that being underestimated was often an advantage. "Look, it's the Deathworlder," whispered a Veltari student, her crystalline features catching the overhead lights. How did someone from that primitive planet even qualify for advanced physics? Zara pretended not to hear. She had grown accustomed to the whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle way other students moved away when she approached. Earth was classified as a Class 9 death world, a designation that made most civilized species shudder. The fact that humans had developed spaceflight despite their planet's hostile environment was considered either miraculous or deeply suspicious, depending on who you asked. The Advanced Theoretical Physics classroom occupied the top floor of the science wing, its transparent walls offering a stunning view of the Academy's carefully maintained gardens. Perfectly manicured alien flora swayed in the artificial breeze, a testament to the Galactic Confederation's mastery over hostile environments. Professor Kethvar, a tall, graceful being from the peaceful Altrian homeworld, had already begun setting up the day's equipment. Today we continue our study of molecular dynamics in extreme environments, the professor announced as students settled into their adaptive seats. We will be examining the theoretical limits of matter under stress conditions that exist only in the most dangerous regions of space. Zara took her usual seat in the back corner, noting how other students had unconsciously created a buffer zone around her. She pulled out her simple notebook, a habit that had initially confused her classmates who relied entirely on neural interfaces and holographic displays. Writing by hand was considered quaint at best, primitive at worst. Velkarn, an imposing reptilian student from the warrior planet Drakthul, sat 3 rows ahead. Despite his species' reputation for aggression, the Drakthuli had been remarkably peaceful for the past 2 centuries, channeling their natural intensity into academic and artistic pursuits. Velkarn exemplified this evolution, perfectly intelligent, disciplined, and utterly dedicated to his studies. Who can explain why standard atmospheric processors fail when exposed to Class 7 energy storms? Professor Kethvar asked, his translated voice carrying the melodic quality typical of his species. Several students raised various appendages. The professor selected a confident-looking Zinthari female whose blue-tinted skin marked her as coming from one of the core academic worlds. The ionic interference disrupts the quantum matrices that maintain molecular cohesion, she replied smoothly. Standard safety protocols require immediate evacuation of any area experiencing Class 7 conditions. Correct, but incomplete, the professor said. The theoretical mathematics suggest that certain exotic materials might withstand such conditions, but practical application has proved impossible. The energies involved would destroy any known manufacturing equipment. Zara found herself unconsciously flexing her fingers as she took notes. The discussion reminded her of the stories her grandfather used to tell about working in Earth's deep ocean thermal vents, places where the pressure and heat would instantly kill most known life forms. Humans had not only survived in such environments, but had learned to thrive there. Perhaps, suggested another student, this one from the technologically advanced Kaith Collective, the problem lies in our approach. We attempt to impose order on chaos rather than working with the natural forces involved. Professor Kethvar nodded approvingly. An interesting philosophical point. However, the mathematics clearly show that any attempt to harness such forces would require materials and techniques beyond our current understanding. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with students offering increasingly complex theoretical solutions. Zara listened carefully, making occasional notes, but remained silent. She had learned that her contributions were often met with polite skepticism at best. Her professors were kind enough, but She could see the doubt in their eyes when she spoke. How could someone from a primitive world possibly contribute to advanced scientific discourse? As the class period neared its end, Professor Kethvar moved to the equipment station at the front of the room. For our practical demonstration today, we will observe the behavior of synthetic diamond under gradually increasing stress conditions. The apparatus was elegant in its simplicity, a crystalline chamber surrounded by sophisticated monitoring equipment. Inside, a small sample of artificial diamond was held in place by carefully calibrated force fields. We will begin with conditions equivalent to the surface pressure on a standard Class II world, the professor explained. Then, gradually increase stress until we reach theoretical failure points. The demonstration proceeded smoothly at first. Readings appeared on holographic displays as the pressure increased steadily. Students watched with fascination as the molecular structure of the diamond remained stable despite conditions that would crush most organic matter. Now we enter the range where most organic compounds would begin to break down. Professor Kethvar narrated. Observe how the artificial diamond maintains its integrity. Zara noticed something the others had missed. The readings were climbing more rapidly than the professor seemed to realize. A small indicator light on one of the monitoring panels had shifted from green to amber, then to a warning yellow. "Professor," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of student conversation. "The containment field is fluctuating." Professor Kethvar glanced at the displays, his expression shifting to mild concern. "You are correct, Miss Martinez. However, the safety margins built into this equipment are quite generous. We are nowhere near dangerous levels." But Zara had noticed something else. The resonance frequency of the force field was creating a harmonic vibration in the chamber itself. She had seen similar effects in her father's mining equipment back on Earth, where containment failures could bury entire crews under tons of rock. "The harmonic frequency is building toward a cascade failure," she said, rising from her seat. "If the containment field collapses while the pressure is this high, the release could damage the entire classroom." Some students laughed nervously. The idea that their perfectly safe, highly regulated academic environment could pose any real danger seemed absurd. Professor Kethvar checked his readings again, his confidence wavering slightly. "The equipment has multiple redundant safety systems," he said, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Even in the unlikely event of a primary containment failure, the secondary systems would engage automatically." Zara was already moving toward the front of the classroom, her trained eye cataloging the potential failure points. The other students watched with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. What could the primitive human possibly understand about their advanced technology? "Please remain in your seats," Professor Kethvar said as more students began to shift nervously. "I assure you, there is no danger." But the warning indicators were now flashing more urgently. The harmonic vibration in the chamber had become audible, a low thrumming that seemed to resonate in their bones. Zara reached the control panel and began studying the readouts with practiced efficiency. "The cascade is accelerating," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to vent the pressure gradually while maintaining partial containment, or the explosive decompression will turn this room into a debris field." Professor Kethvar hesitated. His training told him to trust the equipment, to follow established protocols. But something in the human girl's demeanor, the casual competence with which she read the danger signs, made him pause. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Zara was already reaching for the manual override controls, her movements quick and precise. "I can reroute the pressure through the secondary vents while maintaining minimum containment. It will take about 90 seconds, but we need everyone to move to the far side of the room first." "This is ridiculous." Velkarn spoke up for the first time that day, his voice carrying the authority of his warrior heritage. "You expect us to panic over equipment that has operated safely for decades because a Deathworlder thinks she knows better?" He stood up, his imposing frame towering over the other students. In one fluid motion, he drew a ceremonial blade from his belt, its polished surface gleaming under the classroom lights. Drakthuli tradition required their warriors to carry such weapons as symbols of their heritage, though they were never intended for actual combat in civilized space. "I will demonstrate how safe this equipment truly is," Velkarn declared, striding toward the apparatus. These Deathworld paranoids see danger where none exists. But, as he raised the blade in a gesture meant to emphasize his point, Zara did something that none of them expected. She smiled. It was not a cruel smile, nor a mocking one. It was the patient, knowing expression of someone who had spent her entire life in genuinely dangerous environments, watching others learn hard lessons about the difference between theoretical safety and practical survival. "Go ahead," she said quietly, her hands never pausing in their work at the control panel. "But maybe step back about 6 feet first. When that containment field fails, the initial pressure wave will send fragments of that diamond through whatever is directly in front of the chamber." The room fell silent except for the growing harmonic vibration from the failing equipment. In that moment, every student in the classroom faced the same realization. They were about to discover whether the girl from the death world actually knew what she was talking about. Zara's fingers flew across the manual controls, implementing a pressure relief sequence that she was inventing in real time, drawing on principles she had learned in Earth's most hostile environments. The equipment had not been designed for this kind of improvised operation, but she was adapting it with the kind of practical engineering that came from a world where mechanical failure often meant death. 60 seconds, she announced calmly, never taking her eyes off the readings. The cascade is still building, but the venting should prevent catastrophic failure. The thrumming sound was now loud enough that several students covered their auditory receptors. Warning lights flashed across multiple panels, painting the classroom in urgent reds and yellows. And, through it all, the small human girl worked with steady concentration, as if defusing potentially lethal equipment malfunctions was just another ordinary part of her day. Velkarn stood frozen, his ceremonial blade still raised, as the implications of Zara's words sank in. The thrumming from the failing containment field had grown loud enough to rattle the transparent walls, and even his warriors' training couldn't completely suppress the primal recognition of danger. 30 seconds, Zara announced, her voice cutting through the mechanical chaos. Her fingers danced across controls that most of the other students didn't even recognize, implementing safety protocols that weren't in any of their textbooks. Professor Kethvar finally overcame his paralysis and activated the classroom's emergency communication system. All students to the rear of the classroom immediately. This is not a drill. The response was immediate, but chaotic. Students from 17 different species, each with their own evolutionary responses to danger, created a confused mass of movement toward the back wall. The Veltari crystalline structures chimed with harmonic frequencies that indicated stress. The furry Kaith clustered together in defensive groups. The serpentine Zalak coiled into protective spirals. Only the humans moved with purposeful calm. All 2 of them. Zara continued working at the control panel while her only human classmate, a quiet engineering student named David Kim, immediately began helping other students navigate around overturned furniture in their haste to retreat. Neither of them showed the kind of panic that seemed to be overtaking the others. "How is she so calm?" whispered the Zenthari girl who had answered the professor's earlier question. "The probability calculations for containment failure are approaching critical thresholds." "Because she's done this before," David replied matter-of-factly, steadying a nervous Veltari student who was struggling with the concept that their safe academic environment might actually pose real danger. "Maybe not exactly this, but close enough." "Impossible," Velkarn said, though he had finally lowered his blade and was backing away from the apparatus. No academic institution would allow students to handle genuinely dangerous equipment. "You're right," Zara called out without turning around, her hands still flying over the controls. "No academic institution would. But mining operations, deep-sea research facilities, and atmospheric processors don't have that luxury." The pressure readings on the display were climbing into ranges marked with warning symbols that most students had never seen before. The artificial diamond inside the chamber was beginning to show stress fractures visible even to the naked eye. But, somehow, impossibly, the catastrophic failure that the mathematics predicted was being held at bay by Zara's improvised interventions. 15 seconds, she announced. "The cascade effect is stabilizing, but we're going to have one significant pressure release when I complete the venting sequence." Professor Kethvar watched in fascination as his student implemented safety procedures that violated everything he understood about proper equipment operation. She was treating the sophisticated laboratory apparatus like improvised field equipment, working around its safety limitations rather than depending on them. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "Where exactly did you learn these techniques?" "My dad runs an atmospheric processing station in the Mariana Deep," she replied, finally, allowing herself a quick glance at the other students. "When your equipment is sitting under 11 kilometers of water and 3,000 kilometers from the nearest rescue station, you learn to fix things rather than wait for replacement parts." The concept was alien to most of her classmates. They came from worlds where equipment failure meant inconvenience, not death, where safety margins were generous enough to account for almost any conceivable problem, where the idea of being truly isolated from help and support was a theoretical concept rather than a daily reality. 5 seconds, Zara announced. "Everyone might want to cover your ears or equivalent auditory organs." The final pressure release came with a sound like controlled thunder. The containment chamber vented its superheated contents through emergency systems that had never been designed to handle such loads. Alarms blared throughout the building as safety protocols engaged throughout the science wing. And then, gradually, the chaos subsided. Emergency lights continued to flash, and automated systems ran diagnostic sequences to assess the damage, but the immediate danger had passed. The artificial diamond that had been moments away from explosive failure now sat harmlessly in an unpressurized chamber, its stress fractures visible but contained. Zara stepped back from the control panel, wiping her hands on her pants in a gesture so casually human that it somehow emphasized just how extraordinary the past few minutes had been. "Well," she said, looking around at the silent classroom full of staring alien faces. "That was more exciting than usual." Velkarn was the first to recover. He walked slowly to the front of the room, his ceremonial blade now properly secured, and examined the readings on the various displays. The mathematical models clearly showed that without Zara's intervention, the containment failure would have turned the front third of the classroom into a debris field traveling at several hundred meters per second. "You saved our lives," he said simply. "I prevented some property damage and maybe a few injuries," Zara corrected. "The emergency force fields would have probably protected most of you from serious harm." "Probably," Professor Kethvar repeated, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was re-evaluating several assumptions. "Miss Martinez, I think perhaps we have been underestimating the practical value of your educational background." The other students were beginning to emerge from their shock, and Zara could see the questions forming in their expressions. How had she known what to do? Or had she learned to read warning signs that their sophisticated sensors had missed? Most importantly, what other knowledge might she possess that their advanced civilization had never needed to develop? "The thing is," Zara said, settling back into her seat as if nothing remarkable had happened, "most of what I just did was basic emergency protocols. Any human who works in industrial environments would have recognized the warning signs." "Basic protocols," the Zenthari girl repeated weakly. "You just performed equipment modifications that our most advanced engineers would need hours to calculate." "Because your most advanced engineers never have to work with failing equipment," David pointed out, speaking for the first time since helping evacuate the other students. "They design things that don't fail, then trust the design. Humans design things that will probably fail, then learn to fix them when they do." Professor Kethvar was running diagnostic routines on his damaged equipment, his expression thoughtful. "This raises some interesting questions about our approach to safety and redundancy. Miss Martinez, would you be willing to share some details about these industrial protocols you mentioned?" "Sure," Zara replied. "But you might want to upgrade your safety equipment first. If this had been a real emergency instead of just a classroom demonstration, we would have needed backup plans for the backup plans." She pulled out her simple paper notebook and began sketching diagrams, showing how the equipment modifications she had implemented could be built into the original design. As she worked, the other students gradually gathered around, their initial fear transforming into curiosity. "You see this feedback loop here?" she said, pointing to her hand-drawn schematic. "In a stable environment, it's not necessary. But when conditions change rapidly, You need multiple ways to control the same variables. Velkarn studied her drawings with the intensity he usually reserved for advanced mathematics. This assumes that primary systems will fail. Our equipment is manufactured to specifications that make such failures statistically impossible. Statistically impossible isn't the same as actually impossible, Zara replied. And when you're working in environments where failure means death, you plan for impossible things to happen anyway. The concept was clearly challenging for students who had been raised in societies where advanced technology and careful engineering had eliminated most existential risks. The idea that competent people planned for their tools to fail was counterintuitive to everything they had learned about proper civilization. So humans just accept that their equipment is unreliable? Asked the Kaith student, her fur still showing stress patterns from the earlier emergency. We accept that everything is unreliable given sufficient stress, David corrected, including the environments we work in, the materials we build with, and the people operating the equipment. So we try to build systems that can tolerate multiple simultaneous failures. Professor Kethvar was studying Zara's sketches with growing fascination. These redundancy concepts could revolutionize how we approach equipment design for extreme environment research. Miss Martinez, I think I need to revise my assumptions about the educational value of your background. Most of us do, Velkarn admitted. I apologize for my earlier skepticism. Your knowledge clearly extends beyond our academic models. Zara looked around at the faces of her classmates, seeing interest and respect where she had previously seen only polite tolerance. It was a pleasant change, though she suspected it wouldn't last long. Once the immediate drama faded, they would probably return to their assumption that advanced civilizations had nothing to learn from primitive worlds. But, for now, at least, they were listening. The really interesting part, she continued, turning to a fresh page in her notebook, is how these principles apply to theoretical problems we've been discussing in class. Take those Class 7 energy storms Professor Kethvar mentioned earlier. Everyone assumes they're too chaotic to work with, but chaos can be predictable if you understand the underlying patterns. She began sketching again, this time drawing what looked like a three-dimensional maze of interconnected systems. Instead of trying to impose order on the energy patterns, you build equipment that can ride the chaos, using the storm's own energy to power defensive systems. It's like surfing a tsunami instead of trying to stand against it. The classroom fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. She was describing techniques that could revolutionize their understanding of extreme environment operations, treating impossible conditions as engineering challenges rather than absolute barriers. And she was doing it with hand-drawn sketches in a paper notebook, using principles she had learned before leaving her home planet. Word of the classroom incident spread through the Galactic Education Center faster than official reports could travel. By the next morning, Zara found herself the center of attention in ways that made her previous anonymity seem like a distant memory. Is it true that you prevented an explosive decompression with just manual controls? Asked a third-year Altrian student as Zara made her way to the dining facility. Did you really modify Professor Kethvar's equipment in real time? Added a graduate researcher from the Zephyrian Collective. Zara managed polite responses while mentally cataloging the various species now approaching her with questions. Representatives from academic programs she had never heard of were suddenly interested in her perspective on problems they had been struggling with for years. The dining facility itself presented its own challenge. Where she had previously eaten alone or with David, she now found herself surrounded by students eager to continue conversations about emergency protocols, redundant systems, and practical engineering applications. The theoretical mathematics for your energy storm surfing concept are fascinating, said Dr. Velthara, a senior researcher who normally didn't interact with undergraduate students. But our simulations suggest the equipment stresses would exceed any known material tolerances. Zara paused with her nutrition paced halfway to her mouth. The artificial flavoring was supposed to mimic something called Terran beef stew, but the result bore no resemblance to anything she recognized as food. Have you run simulations using dynamic load distribution? She asked. If you treat the stress forces as variables instead of constants, you can design materials that get stronger under certain types of pressure. Impossible, declared a materials science professor who had apparently been listening from a nearby table. Material strength is a fundamental physical property. You cannot simply engineer substances to exceed their molecular limits. You can if you understand which limits are actually fundamental and which are just artifacts of static testing, Zara replied. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching molecular diagrams. Look, this is how spider silk works. The individual protein chains are weaker than steel, but the way they're organized lets the web absorb impacts that would shatter rigid materials. A crowd was gathering around their table, students and faculty alike drawn by the discussion. Zara found herself explaining concepts that were basic principles on Earth, but apparently revolutionary in galactic academic circles. So you're suggesting that our entire approach to materials engineering is fundamentally flawed? Asked another professor, her tone carrying both skepticism and curiosity. Not flawed, Zara corrected. Optimized for different conditions. When you can control your environment precisely, static solutions work perfectly. But when you're dealing with variables you can't predict or control, you need adaptive systems. Professor Kethvar arrived just as Zara was demonstrating principles of dynamic stress distribution using her lunch tray and various utensils. Word had reached him that his student was conducting impromptu lectures in the dining facility, and his scientific curiosity had overcome his usual academic dignity. "Miss Martinez," he said, settling into a nearby seat with his own meal. "I've been reviewing the data from yesterday's incident. Your interventions prevented equipment damage that would have cost more than most planetary education budgets, plus injuries to several students," added Velkarn, who had become something of an unofficial spokesperson for the group that had witnessed the emergency. The impact trajectory calculations confirmed that the initial debris field would have reached our previous seating positions. Zara noticed that her status among her classmates had shifted overnight. Where they had previously tolerated her presence, they now sought her opinions on theoretical problems they were struggling with. But, more than that, they were beginning to question assumptions about the relationship between primitive worlds and advanced civilizations. "I've been thinking about your surfing analogy," said the Zinthri girl from their physics class. "If chaos can be predictable, then the energy patterns in those Class 7 storms might contain exploitable structures." "Exactly," Zara replied, turning to a fresh page in her notebook. "Think of it like ocean waves. From the surface, they look completely random. But there are underlying currents, pressure gradients, and tidal forces that create patterns you can learn to read." She began drawing wave diagrams, showing how apparently chaotic surface motion could be broken down into predictable component forces. "The key is understanding that order and chaos aren't opposites," she continued. "They're different scales of the same phenomenon. What looks random at one level might be highly organized at another level." Dr. Velthara was taking notes on a quantum interface, recording concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about how advanced civilizations approached complex problems. These principles could revolutionize our understanding of stellar phenomena, atmospheric dynamics, even quantum mechanics applications. They could, Zara agreed. But implementation would require different engineering approaches than what most galactic civilizations use. You'd need redundant systems, adaptive protocols, and materials designed to exceed their specifications under stress. The implications were staggering. Every major civilization in the galaxy had developed along similar technological paths, prioritizing efficiency, predictability, and controlled environments. The idea that a primitive world might have developed superior approaches to handling chaos and uncertainty challenged basic assumptions about technological progress. "Miss Martinez," Professor Kethvar said carefully, "I think we need to arrange some more formal discussions about these concepts. The applications could extend far beyond undergraduate physics demonstrations." But before Zara could respond, an announcement echoed through the dining facility's public address system. "All students and faculty, please prepare for emergency lockdown procedures. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Students from species across the galaxy began implementing their various emergency protocols, creating a chaos of conflicting procedures and panic responses. Some sought to exit the facility immediately. Others activated personal shields or defensive postures. A few simply froze in place, overwhelmed by the conflicting information. Zara, meanwhile, was already moving toward the facility's main information display, her trained instincts automatically seeking data about the nature of the emergency. David was right behind her, both humans responding to crisis with the same calm efficiency they had demonstrated in the classroom. Solar storm incoming. Zara read from the emergency bulletin. Class 6 energy disturbance approaching the station. All personnel to secure positions until protective protocols engage. Around them, panic was building. Class 6 solar storms were theoretically manageable by the station's defensive systems, but the timing was problematic. The facility was currently between major planetary bodies, meaning their usual protection from gravitational interference was minimal. Estimated time to impact? David asked, studying the technical specifications. 47 minutes, Zara replied. But look at these energy readings. This isn't a normal solar storm. She was right. The approaching disturbance showed characteristics that didn't match standard stellar phenomena. The energy patterns were too organized, too focused. Instead of the broad-spectrum chaos typical of solar storms, this showed distinct frequency bands and what looked almost like modulated signals. "It's artificial," she said quietly, though her voice carried clearly through the dining facility's excellent acoustics. "Someone is using stellar engineering to create a directed energy weapon." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. The concept of weaponizing solar storms was so far beyond normal galactic warfare that most species lacked even theoretical frameworks for understanding it. "Impossible," declared one of the professors. "The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most star systems." "Unless you're not generating the energy," Zara replied, her mind racing through possibilities. "If you're just redirecting and focusing energy that already exists, the requirements become manageable." She was already moving toward the facility's emergency command center, driven by the same instincts that had prompted her intervention in the physics classroom. Around her, faculty and students were still struggling to process the implications of her analysis. "Miss Martinez," Professor Kethvar called after her. "Where are you going?" "To see if this station's defensive systems can be modified to handle directed energy weapons," she replied without slowing down. "Because if I'm right about this being artificial, then standard storm protocols won't be sufficient." The emergency command center was restricted to senior faculty and administrative staff, but the ongoing crisis had created enough confusion that Zara was able to slip inside along with several professors who had been following her analysis. The tactical displays confirmed her fears. The approaching energy storm showed clear signs of artificial manipulation, with focused beam structures that would overwhelm the station's standard protective systems. Estimated shield effectiveness against this energy pattern? She asked the facility's senior engineer, a methodical being from the highly technical Corvin species. "Approximately 43%, came the grim reply. "Insufficient to prevent catastrophic damage to station infrastructure." Zara studied the defensive system schematics, comparing them against the incoming threat analysis. The station's shields were designed to deflect broad-spectrum energy dispersed across normal solar storm patterns. Against focused beams carrying concentrated power, they would be largely ineffective. "Can the shield generators be reconfigured to create rotating defensive fields?" she asked. "The power requirements would exceed safe operational parameters," the engineer replied. "We would risk burning out the entire defensive grid." "What if we don't try to stop the energy?" Zara said, pulling out her notebook and beginning another sketch. "What if we redirect it instead?" The concept was simple in theory, revolutionary in practice. Instead of absorbing or deflecting the incoming energy beams, the station's shields could be reconfigured to channel the attack into the station's power collection systems. "You want to feed a directed energy weapon into our power grid?" the senior engineer asked, his translated voice carrying notes of disbelief. "With proper conditioning and distribution, yes," Zara replied, her sketches showing how the station's existing infrastructure could be modified to handle massive energy inputs. Think of it as the ultimate stress test for adaptive engineering. Through the command center's transparent walls, she could see other students and faculty gathering in the corridors, their faces showing the fear that came with realizing their safe academic environment was about to become a battlefield. But Zara was smiling again, the same patient expression she had worn while preventing the physics classroom disaster. Because once again, she found herself in exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as senior staff tried to process Zara's proposal. The concept of using an incoming weapon as a power source violated fundamental assumptions about defensive strategies that had been refined over thousands of years of galactic civilization. The energy conversion systems weren't designed to handle weapons-grade inputs, protested the station's chief administrator, a diplomatic Thylorian whose species had built their reputation on careful risk assessment. We could cause catastrophic overloads throughout the entire facility. We'll definitely cause catastrophic damage if we do nothing, Zara replied, her hands already working on detailed calculations. The incoming energy concentration will overwhelm standard shields within 12 minutes of contact. But if we can channel it properly, we could actually boost our defensive capabilities. Station Commander Zeth Cole, a veteran military officer from the disciplined Vortax species, studied Zara's rapidly evolving sketches with the same intensity he would normally reserve for fleet tactical analyses. Explain the conversion process, he ordered. Zara's notebook was filling with interconnected diagrams showing how the station's power collection arrays could be reconfigured to accept the incoming energy beams. The key is understanding that the attackers aren't sending random destruction. They're using focused energy streams, which means the power has already been conditioned and directed. We just need to redirect it into our own systems instead of our hull. The power coupling systems alone would require modifications that normally take weeks to implement, the chief engineer pointed out. We have 38 minutes. Then, we don't modify the systems, David said, speaking up from where he had been studying the technical specifications. We improvise bypasses using emergency connections and manual overrides. The engineering staff turned to stare at the quiet human student, clearly struggling to understand how undergraduate-level knowledge could address problems that their advanced degrees and decades of experience couldn't solve. Emergency connections aren't designed to handle energy flows of this magnitude, the senior engineer explained patiently. The safety margins would be exceeded by factors of hundreds. Safety margins are built for normal operations, Zara replied. Emergency operations require different approaches. We're not trying to build a permanent solution, just something that will work long enough to save the station. Commander Zeth Cole made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself. Show us what you need. The next 30 minutes became a master class in improvised engineering that challenged every principle of proper galactic technology management. Zara and David, working with increasingly enthusiastic support from students and faculty who had gathered around the command center, began implementing modifications that turned sophisticated defensive systems into jerry-rigged energy collection networks. Route the primary shield generators through the emergency power distribution grid, Zara directed, while simultaneously calculating load balancing requirements on her notebook. We'll use the station's own rotation to create a dynamic collection array. Professor Kethvar found himself serving as liaison between the humans and the engineering staff, translating concepts that bridge the gap between theoretical physics and practical desperation. She's treating the entire station as a single adaptive system, he explained to the chief engineer. Instead of individual components operating within safe parameters, everything becomes part of an integrated response to changing conditions. Velkarn had appointed himself as coordinator for the student volunteers, organizing work crews with military efficiency while adapting his leadership style to accommodate species who responded differently to authority. Teams 3 and 7 focus on the power coupling modifications in Section 12, he directed. Remember, we're implementing temporary solutions, not permanent installations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Students from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were taking engineering direction from representatives of a species they had considered primitive just days earlier. Energy storm impact in 15 minutes, announced the automated systems. All personnel to secure positions. But, instead of seeking shelter, the combined human-alien work crews were racing to complete modifications that conventional wisdom said were impossible. Emergency power couplings that had never been designed to work together were being linked through improvised connections. Shield generators were being reconfigured to operate in ways their manufacturers had never intended. Primary array modifications complete, reported David from his position at the main engineering console. We're getting clean connections through all major distribution nodes. Secondary collection grid is showing green indicators, added the chief engineer, his skepticism gradually giving way to fascination as he watched improvised systems achieve performance levels that exceeded design specifications. Zara was orchestrating the entire operation from the command center's main tactical display, using her notebook calculations to predict system interactions while monitoring dozens of improvised connections in real time. The key factor now is timing, she announced. When the energy beams hit our collection arrays, we'll have about 40 seconds of maximum input before the improvised connections start to fail. We need to route that power into the station's defense grid and use it to boost our shields for the remainder of the storm. Commander Zethkol was recording everything for later analysis, recognizing that he was witnessing engineering techniques that could revolutionize how galactic civilizations approached emergency situations. 5 minutes to impact, the automated systems announced. The station's corridors were now empty except for the work crews making final adjustments to the improvised energy collection system. Through the transparent walls, the approaching energy storm was visible as a brilliant cascade of focused light that grew brighter with each passing moment. All teams, final system checks, Zara called out through the communication network. We're about to find out if desperate improvisation can beat proper engineering. The responses came back quickly, teams of students and faculty reporting successful connections throughout the station. Sophisticated aliens who had never considered the possibility that their equipment might be used outside its design parameters were discovering the practical benefits of adaptive thinking. Collection arrays show full connectivity, reported the chief engineer. I still cannot believe this configuration is actually functional. It's functional because it has to be, David replied. When you're facing impossible situations, you engineer impossible solutions. 2 minutes to impact, the automated systems announced. Through the command center's displays, they could see the energy storm's final approach. The focused beams were now clearly visible, streams of concentrated power that would have overwhelmed any conventional defense system. But, instead of bracing for destruction, the station's improvised collection arrays were positioned to capture and redirect that same energy. Here's the part where we find out if humans are actually as adaptable as they claim to be, Zara muttered, her hands poised over the manual controls that would activate their improvised system. The first energy beams struck the station's outer collection arrays with brilliant flashes of light that could be seen throughout the facility. But, instead of explosions and hull breaches, the display showed energy readings climbing rapidly as the improvised systems began channeling the attack into the station's power grid. It's working, breathed Professor Kethvar. The energy conversion is actually working. Collection efficiency at 93%, reported the chief engineer, his voice carrying amazement that professional dignity couldn't quite suppress. Power output exceeding station maximum design specifications. But Zara was watching different readings, monitoring the stress levels on connections that were handling energy flows far beyond their intended capacity. 35 seconds until we start losing connections, she announced. Routing maximum power to defensive shields now. Her hands flew across the manual controls, directing the captured energy into the station's shield generators. The defensive systems, boosted by power levels they had never been designed to handle, created protective fields that could withstand energy weapons that would have destroyed most galactic installations. 20 seconds, she called out, watching improvised connections begin to fail as they reached the limits of their temporary modifications. Around the command center, alien faces watched displays that showed their academic facility performing like a military fortress, powered by energy from the very weapons that had been intended to destroy it. 10 seconds. The energy storm reached its peak intensity, focused beams that carried enough power to devastate planetary surfaces. But the station's improvised collection system was channeling that destruction into its own defensive networks, creating shields that turned certain annihilation into spectacular but harmless light shows. 5 seconds. Emergency disconnections began engaging automatically as improvised systems reached failure points. But they had done their job. The station's shields, boosted by captured energy, were now operating at defensive levels that could withstand anything the attackers might send. Time, Zara announced. The energy storm continued for another 6 minutes, but it was now just a spectacular display visible through the station's transparent walls. The improvised collection system had failed, as intended, but not before capturing enough energy to boost the station's defenses far beyond their normal capabilities. When the attack finally ended, the command center fell silent except for the gentle hum of normal station operations. Commander Zethkol was the first to speak. Miss Martinez, I believe you just demonstrated that our understanding of defensive engineering may require some fundamental revisions. Zara was already making notes in her book, sketching improvements for the next time they might face similar situations. The basic principles aren't that complicated. You just have to accept that sometimes the best solution is the one that shouldn't work. Around the command center, alien faculty and students were beginning to process the implications of what they had just accomplished. An improvised defense system, implemented by undergraduate students using principles from a primitive world, had just proven superior to thousands of years of advanced galactic engineering. I believe, said Professor Kethvar quietly, that we may need to reconsider our assumptions about the relationship between technological advancement and practical capability. Through the station's transparent walls, they could see the fading remnants of the energy storm that had been intended to destroy them. Instead, it had become fuel for their defenses, transformed from a weapon of annihilation into a demonstration of humanity's most fundamental characteristic, the ability to turn impossible situations into unexpected opportunities. 3 weeks after the energy storm incident, Zara found herself standing before the Galactic Education Council's emergency session, facing an assembly that represented every major civilization in known space. The ornate chamber, normally reserved for diplomatic ceremonies and formal academic recognitions, had been hastily converted to accommodate beings who rarely gathered in the same physical location. The formal inquiry into the recent defensive improvisation has concluded, announced Council Chair Velnara, her crystalline Altrian features reflecting the chamber's ceremonial lighting. We are here to address implications that extend far beyond academic protocol. Zara noticed that the seating arrangements had changed significantly since her arrival at the academy. Where she had once sat in the back corner, isolated by the unconscious prejudices of advanced civilizations, she now found herself at the center of attention with representatives from dozens of worlds seeking her perspective on problems they had been struggling with for generations. Miss Martinez, continued the council chair, your techniques have been analyzed by our most advanced engineering teams. The consensus is that your approaches should not work according to established principles, yet they consistently produce superior results to conventional methods. That's because established principles were developed for controlled environments, Zara replied, her voice carrying the confidence that came from being proven right repeatedly. When conditions change rapidly or exceed design parameters, you need different approaches. Dr. Kethnal, the Galactic Confederation's chief technology assessor, activated a holographic display that showed comparative analyses of human and galactic engineering approaches. Our investigation has revealed fundamental differences in problem-solving methodologies that have profound implications for how civilizations develop technological capabilities. The display showed stark contrasts between the careful, methodical approaches favored by advanced galactic civilizations and the adaptive, improvisational techniques that humans had developed out of necessity. Galactic standard practice emphasizes prediction, control, and optimization, Dr. Kethnal explained. Human approaches emphasize adaptation, redundancy, and improvisation. Both methodologies are effective, but under different conditions. Zara watched the assembled representatives process this information, seeing recognition dawn on faces that represented species who had never needed to consider the possibility that their approaches might be incomplete rather than superior. The implications extend beyond engineering applications, added Dr. Velthara, who had become something of an unofficial advocate for expanded human-galactic cooperation. These adaptive principles could revolutionize our approaches to scientific research, infrastructure development, and even diplomatic relations. Commander Zethkol rose from his designated position, his military bearing commanding attention from the diverse assembly. From a defense perspective, the demonstrated capabilities represent paradigm shifts in how we understand tactical applications of available resources. However, interrupted Administrator Kolvash, a cautious being from the risk-averse Thylorian collective, implementing such approaches would require fundamental changes to safety protocols that have protected galactic civilization for millennia. Zara found herself at the center of a debate that had implications far beyond her original intention of simply completing her exchange program. The question wasn't just whether human techniques were effective, but whether adopting them would fundamentally change how galactic civilization approached the relationship between safety and capability. With respect, Zara said, rising from her seat, I think you're approaching this as an either-or decision when it's really about expanding your available options. The chamber fell silent as representatives focused on her words. You don't have to abandon methods that work in controlled environments, she continued. But when you encounter situations that exceed those controls, it helps to have backup approaches that can function in chaos. She pulled out her notebook, a gesture that had become familiar to the assembled beings over the past weeks, and began sketching interconnected diagrams. Think of it as layered systems, she explained. Your existing approaches handle normal operations beautifully. Human approaches complement those by providing alternatives when normal operations become impossible. Professor Kethvar, who had become something of an interpreter between human and galactic perspectives, stood to support her analysis. Miss Martinez is correct. The integration possibilities could provide robust solutions that combine the efficiency of galactic engineering with the adaptability of human improvisation. But such integration would require training programs that teach improvisation and adaptive thinking, pointed out the educational representative from the scholarly Zenthri Republic. Our current curricula emphasize precision and predictability, which is exactly why you should consider expanding them, David said, speaking from his position among the student observers. Learning to work outside your comfort zone isn't just useful for emergencies. It's valuable for pushing the boundaries of what's considered possible. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with representatives from dozens of civilizations exploring the implications of incorporating human adaptive techniques into galactic standard practices. Some argued for gradual integration. Others advocated for comprehensive reforms. A few insisted that existing methods were sufficient for civilized space. But gradually, a consensus emerged around the recognition that the galaxy had encountered situations where conventional approaches had proven inadequate, and that human techniques offered demonstrated solutions to previously intractable problems. The formal recommendation, announced Council Chair Velnara after extensive deliberation, is for the establishment of joint research programs combining galactic technological advancement with human adaptive engineering principles. She paused, looking directly at Zara. Miss Martinez, we would like to offer you a position as chief consultant for these programs, with authority to recruit additional human experts as needed. The offer was unprecedented. Never before had a representative from a Class 9 Deathworld been offered a senior position in galactic academia. The implications went far beyond Zara's personal career, representing a fundamental shift in how advanced civilizations viewed the relationship between technological sophistication and practical capability. I accept, Zara said simply. But I have some conditions. The assembled representatives waited with curiosity that bordered on amazement. A human from a primitive world was about to dictate terms to the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. First, the research programs need to include field training in genuinely dangerous environments. You can't learn adaptive thinking in safe classrooms. Second, we need to establish exchange programs that send galactic students to human institutions, not just bring humans to galactic facilities. Third, the curriculum needs to emphasize that improvisation and precision aren't opposites. They're complementary approaches to different types of challenges. Council Chair Velnara considered the proposals, recognizing that accepting them would represent a significant departure from traditional galactic educational philosophy. Your conditions are acceptable, she announced. We look forward to learning from human expertise while sharing galactic knowledge and resources. As the formal session concluded, Zara found herself surrounded by representatives who wanted to discuss specific applications of human techniques to problems their civilizations had been struggling with. The conversations ranged from asteroid mining operations to deep space exploration, from emergency response protocols to advanced materials research. Velkarn approached as the crowd began to disperse. I want to apologize again for my initial skepticism. Your knife demonstration in Professor Kethvar's classroom seems like ancient history now. You mean when you waved a ceremonial blade around while I tried to prevent an equipment explosion? Zara replied with a smile. That feels like a different lifetime. In many ways, it was, he said seriously. That moment changed how I understand the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, between theoretical understanding and practical capability. Through the chamber's transparent walls, they could see the stars that represented hundreds of civilizations, each with their own approaches to the challenges of existence in a complex and often hostile universe. The galaxy was about to embark on an unprecedented experiment in combining the careful precision of advanced technology with the adaptive resilience of species who had learned to thrive in impossible conditions. Zara pulled out her notebook one final time, beginning to sketch plans for research programs that would teach improvisation to beings who had never needed to consider the possibility that their equipment might fail, their environments might change, or their careful calculations might prove insufficient. At the top of the page, she wrote a simple title, Advanced Applications of Backup Plans for Impossible Situations. It was, she reflected, a perfect summary of what humans had been doing for their entire evolutionary history. And now, finally, the rest of the galaxy was ready to learn. The girl from the Deathworld who had once eaten lunch alone was now preparing to revolutionize how advanced civilizations approached the fundamental challenges of existence. Not by abandoning what worked, but by expanding the definition of what was possible when conventional solutions proved inadequate. As she worked on her sketches, surrounded by beings who represented the pinnacle of galactic achievement, Zara realized that the most important lesson she could teach had nothing to do with specific techniques or emergency protocols. It was simply this: when someone waves a knife in class and the equipment starts to fail, sometimes the best response is to smile and get back to work. Because impossible situations, properly approached, were just opportunities that hadn't been properly understood yet.